program since 2011, after joining CHP as a member of the inaugural PESP team in 2005. Cass is focused on promoting the benefits and transformative power of consumer participation. She's passionate about the rights of consumers to have a say in all decisions that impact on them, from government policy through to community sector organisations delivering services and down to the program supporting them. Cassandra has also managed CHP's peer support resettlement project. That is the focus of today's forum. She continues to work with peer support workers and their managers in the specialist homeless sector in Victoria, and provide support and advice to other organisations considering development of peer support positions. And before I go to Cass, I think we might just start thinking about other acronyms that are just roll off the tongue if we ever do this up here. Over to you, yeah. Cassandra.
I know there's so many long words that we want to shorten because we're all so short of time. Thanks very much, Mike. So you can call me Cass, even though I can't hear you. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of all of the lands that we're meeting on. For me, it's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation in Victoria. Pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and anyone who might be Aboriginal with us today. So going back to the peer support resettlement project, I thought I'd talk a bit about my role during that project, and then also ongoing what I'm currently doing, and probably some of my key learnings might be helpful too. Way back when we were first thinking about starting the project, it was funny to me that we didn't have peer support workers in the homelessness sector. Like when we'd been talking to people with a lived experience about that need for support when they'd moved into housing and that during that quite traumatic period for them, I was sort of thinking about other sectors that had had peer support for so long and thought, well, we're quite similar. Like if you actually look at some of the experiences of people and the support needs they have, the homelessness sector, it has so much in common with the mental health sector or the drug and alcohol sector. And yet I've not even heard of anyone talking about peer support work. And I thought it was strange that we hadn't done so, but I was really pleased when we started sort of kicking off the project and committing to making sure that we did. So my job was to manage the peer support workers and I sort of oversee the project, if you like. It was a lot of support provided to the organisations who were going to have peer support workers outposted with them, and then support to the peer support workers themselves, of course. At the start of the project, a lot of the discussion that happened in the advisory group meetings led us to put some things in place that we thought might help make this work. So the staff members who were out in the other organisations that were going to have peer support workers working in them said that they needed to know more about what peer support work was, that the people within their management group needed to understand it as best they can and understand how it would fit into the organisation, what the organisation can do to try and support those roles to make sure that they work and support the teams that they're going to be working within. And that the teams themselves, the multidisciplinary teams that we were referring to previously, that they also, all those things, understand what peer support work is, get a chance to get any questions off their chest that they might be unsure about, that they understand how best to work with them in a way that ensures that the peer support work is complementing their work and vice versa, and to sort of monitor these things as they go along. So very sort of in a really down-to-earth kind of a way, I just went around to meetings of the management groups first, and then went to meetings with the actual teams who were going to have peer support workers, and I just spoke to them. So I'm by no means an expert in peer support work, but we'd done the training, we'd had many discussions in the advisory groups and got to a point where we had a good understanding of what these roles were going to look like and what their purpose was, and had a lot of advice from the experts from Wellways and Shark about all of these elements, you know, how teams can support the peer support workers, how management best supports them, etc. So I just went around and had conversations with people without PowerPoints and all that sort of stuff. And people asked me questions, and there were no silly questions. They were allowed to ask me anything they wanted. And, you know, a lot of the questions were really understandable, you know, and as Ian said, there were things like, you know, what if someone is triggered by a conversation about their lived experience? What do we do? And again, as Ian said, it's all about bringing it back to that, you know, this is a discipline. Yeah, the staff member would be treated the way in that situation that you might be treated if you came to work and you were triggered by something that someone said or disclosed. It should be no different. So those conversations were had, and the feedback that we got sort of down the track a little bit was that they were really important conversations to have and really helpful for the teams and for the management. So that is a key learning for me, is that is really important. And I'll come to where we are now and how those talks fit in now, but I'll talk to you a bit about the background first. It was also my role to provide supervision to the peer support workers. So they were supervised like crazy because they had me supervising them as their direct manager. And then, of course, they had supervision with the managers in the organisations where they were outposted. But that supervision at the organisation was more about the cases that they were supporting, or the people that they were supporting. But it was more of a case management sort of supervision, whereas mine was more about professional development and the role itself, and that more peer support discipline. And then they also had the co-reflection that Daisy was referring to earlier, and that is ongoing. And the co-reflection has been incredibly important. We were very lucky to have Wellways agree to have one of their experts come and facilitate those sessions. So they happened regularly. So yes, lots of supervision and reflection. I think they would have known themselves pretty well by the end of the project, but really important stuff. So, you know, even though one of our learnings was that the 10 hours a week wasn't enough, we still wouldn't have removed any of those elements of supervision. It was just too important. So the other element that we put in place was community of practice meetings. So one lot for the managers or supervisors of the peer support workers, and then one for the peer support workers themselves. And they've been, they're different to the co-reflection, because the co-reflection is really focused on the intentional peer support framework, and then how that applies to your work, and then reflecting on, you know, how you might be able to bring yourself back into those IPS values and tasks. Whereas the community practice, was more about, you know, so what do you want to talk about today? What's going on with the peer support roles, or your management of them, or the teams that we need to discuss? And so they're very much driven by the people who are at the meetings, and there might be things like there is some peer drift going on, and peer drift, Daisy will be able to speak to better than me, but I've seen it and I've heard it, and I know it's true. So it's where the peer support worker, particularly where there's only one within a team, or maybe even within an organisation, starts drifting into another role. So it might be that, like Joelle, that they work as a peer support worker in a team of case managers, nurses, mental health workers. If those case managers are not really clear on the boundaries of the peer support worker role, they might start asking them to do things to help them support their consumers. So I'm really busy today. I can't do these tasks for the person I'm supporting. Can you do it? And I mean, the answer is no, I can't, because I'm a peer support worker, not a case manager. But not everyone feels comfortable to have to say that. And so there can be some pressure there. So, you know, that is another key learning, is that without the co-reflection, without the supervision, without the clear understanding and the training, you'll end up losing your peer support workers, because they'll turn into something else. And then what's the point of it all? You know? So the community of practice was really good for bringing up those sort of current topics and current challenges that were happening, and talking about together how to get through them. Where one worker or one manager might have had an issue come up, often someone else at that meeting will have had the issue and overcome it, so they can share their learnings. It was also really good space for happy stories. So at the end of, or towards the end of the meetings, we would always talk about the good things that had happened, what was working successfully, what was really enjoyable about the roles, and about working in that space. And that was a fantastic learning too, I think, is that it's so important to do that. I don't think we do it enough, you know, the broader sector. Like, how often do we talk to each other about the good stuff that's going on? I mean, you'd have to really have a think about, you know, what do I want to say there? Because we're so used to talking about, you know, the things that we don't have enough of and the challenges and all that sort of thing. But it's a healthy space to be in, I think. So that's probably the main sort of things that were in place as far as the project went. The other things that we did, talking about the role and what people did in their role, that was somewhat difficult in some ways, because intentional peer support is quite fluid, and it will change depending on the two people who are coming together and what is going on in their lives at the time, and where the relationship's going to move to. Whereas we work in organisations and we have policies and we have responsibilities, we have managers who are supervisors and are going to ask us about stuff, you know. So, and we have to be accountable to all of that and work within that. So I found it was a challenge to work out that space. How do we define the role? How do we make sure it stays as a peer support role and yet adhere to all those things that we have to do as an organisation? So that was also a real learning. That what we did that was really helpful in that space was to sort of brainstorm what possible activities a peer support worker might do in these roles. And they weren't hard and fast. It's not like a position description, but it's just so that we had an idea, and then the teams would have an idea when they were working with them too. So the way we came up with those ideas was to say, well, what is the real purpose of the project, and what is the purpose of the role? And the key to that is obviously resettlement and stabilisation. And so the role really can do, you know, it's quite flexible in how it helps someone achieve that, but that's got to be the focus. So whatever you do, you've got to almost be able to explain how that's going to help someone resettle, with that still focus on the relationship. So it might have, and Ian's listed sort of the areas in which they might work earlier. So we just brought that down to some possible, you know, actual activities that they might do. So that was really helpful in helping figure out how this role that's quite fluid fits in within this organisation and its framework. So that was really important thing to do. And revisiting it sort of down the track's helpful too, I find, just to keep bringing it back to that purpose of the project and the role. Excuse me. Of course, you get something stuck in your throat as soon as you start talking, don't you? And now, just to sort of finish off, what currently I'm doing is continuing to work with the peer support workers and their managers. So the community practice meetings still run, and I facilitate those. Liaising with it is Wellways currently, but it's probably going to change soon, that making sure those co-reflection sessions happen with an external facilitator. I have recently started going around to the teams again to have these discussions we had at the start, because there's been a lot of staff turnover, but also it's not particularly fresh in people's minds anymore. So I'm doing that. And what I've realized is everyone's really keen for training. So we have to make sure that there's something in place where whether you're involved at the very start of the project or you come in as a staff member that's going to work in that team down the track, you need to have a go-to, training that you can go and do, because it's just absolutely vital. So I think my throat's telling me to stop talking. And that's probably a good indicator, but it's probably the clock as well, I reckon. So thanks very much for having me.
Oh, thanks, Cassandra. I was dying just watching you choke. But you're amongst friends, so it's all right. Have a spit, have a cough. It's all good. Hey, the question I would have is, I had staff when I was working for Vinnie's running their services, and it was really easy to work out where someone fit on the award. How is that managed with peers? Because, where do they start? Where do they finish? If you don't want someone to be stuck within a category that they can't progress, so therefore they leave. So how does that work out?
Yeah, that was another, actually, I forgot about that. That was another, took quite a few conversations and a few advisory group meetings for that one. And still there, to be honest, isn't, I don't think, enough consistency. So what we decided to do was look at, say, because we weren't in the position description, one of the key selection criteria was not a university degree or a certificate. It was the peer support training, which is different. When I say certificate, I mean like a TAFE thing. So what we thought was, well, if someone sort of didn't have that, requirement of education in a homelessness service before the peer support workers were there, they might get an entry-level job and work their way up. So we thought, well, we'll make it sort of based on that theory. So I can't, to be honest with you, I can't even remember what the actual classification was now. Ian probably does. But what I'm hoping for is we get to a point where it's acknowledged that the peer support workers are a discipline, as are a case manager, and that they're all part of the same team. So I think they should all be paid the same rate, and be in a similar sort of classification,
But for the project, we had to put forward at the beginning a budget proposal and to work out our numbers essentially for the application and then moving forward. And because we employed them, we could control that, and that project's now finished, and they've all three positions, as I said, have been funded ongoing, but each of the individual organisations are then employing them, so they're working out their own things, obviously. But what we did was, I think it was youth work, or we found where would be a starting point for the sector for a worker in our sector, and I've got a feeling it was youth work award, and then that's where we put it as the beginning of that level, or the equivalent, like it's changed. So it's in terms of if you're able to get a project up in the Northern Territory, they're the things that you would put in your project proposal. And I think it's important from the get-go to recognise, again, it's an important discipline, and it's not that goes to any other role, and it's got to be properly funded, and it's got to be it's got to be on an award somewhere that it's equivalent to an equivalent role. I think that would be our view on it. The other thing, I just on the back of what Cass was saying, it's sort of another learning, I think, for us, and it's sort of an ongoing learning, because we're now funded. the project finished, and then our department at DHS down here funded those all positions to go forward. But they also gave us some funding to continue playing that sort of support role that Cass played through the project, and which is, like I said, is organising those co-reflection, the communities of practice, but also going back to the services, and really has reinforced to us the importance of support from an organisational level. And that's where the advantage of, say, Wellways is. At the very highest level at Wellways, the model is supported. So there's authorisations at all levels. And one of the similarities to consumer participation is that, we're always trying to promote consumer participation, and we get lots of people saying it's a great idea. It really doesn't get it embedded into an organisation till the board says this is a non-negotiable for our organisation, that we have participation as a key element of it. Otherwise, you're always at the risk of getting turnover of key staff who are the champions, and the champions leave, and then it's like, well, we have to, going forward, Cass and I have talked a bit about this phenomenon, and maybe we have to keep going back and convincing people. And it sort of goes to the question about efficacy that we mentioned before a little bit, is that I talked about from a case management perspective, you're really concrete about tasks and things you can do, and how long did you spend with a client, and what did you actually do. That plays out all the way to your program design and in your relationship with the funders. Will tell us exactly what you did, and that's a little bit hard with IPS and so there's, it has the potential for making managers nervous, for instance, if they can't. What do you mean you spent 2 hours talking about what happened when you first moved into a house? What's that's not concrete. So I think that's where you need your organisational support. So yeah, that's okay. That's all part of what we're trying to achieve here. We're trying to make their house a home. You don't do that by buying them 20 light clothes and saying job done. So
no more questions through there. So I've got lots of questions, but I think I'll wait because they may be answered by Joel. So